All right. So now we're looking at Paul's personal friends here. This is a chapter that just has a little couple of short bits and pieces in it in terms of, supporting the Lord's work is what we've looked at, and just different things that are going on, Paul's travels. And so now he sort of is edging into talking about how Timothy and Apollos figure into these plans. And but I always think it's good to go and look at these men that are mentioned in the Bible, because they're scattered around. There's not a lot about them, but what is there about them pardon me, is very, very beneficial, and it's very instructive in terms of how we should be as Christian believers. So these are two, I would say, Paul's, personal friends that he was working with. So anyway, so we'll get looking at those. And so this is 1 Corinthians 16, 10 through 12. So I would say that we'll probably have maybe another week or two of 1 Corinthians, and then that'll be us sort of finished up with that. So the first little paragraph here is about Timothy, and it says, "If Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear, for he does the work of the Lord, as I also do. And therefore let no one despise him, but send him on his journey in peace, that he may come to me, for I am waiting for him with the brethren. And now concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to come to you with the brethren, but he was quite unwilling to come at this time. However, he will come when he has a convenient time." So now, when you just look at, if you just isolated this and didn't consider who these men were, you would be like, okay, next, So, but I think we have to understand who Timothy is and who Apollos is. But before I get into the kind of ins and outs of these particular men, I want to take a bit of a psychological road here in terms of personality types, because Paul is dealing with different sorts of people. We deal with certain sorts of people, and there are generally 4 different sort of personality types, and so I want to talk about those 4 things. And just briefly, it's one of those topics that you could talk about for the next year. And there's all kinds of testing one could do to find out what kind of personality you have and all that kind of stuff. But I think once you hear these little bits and pieces, you go, well, that's me. And there's a bit of overlap, with some of these personalities. But I think the reason I'm doing this is so that you can then sort of identify what type of person Paul is, what type of person Timothy is, and what type of person Apollos is. And they're all different. They're all very different sorts of guys, and yet they're working collectively together. And so sometimes when we're coming across people, we don't like how they get on or something like that, because there's something about their personality that sort of, or character, that grates on us. And but that may be just how they are. So you have to go and accept how that is. And there's negative aspects and there's positive aspects of those things. And I think when we know ourselves and know how we operate, we go, that's fine. That's how God's made me. But let me focus in on the positive things, as opposed to allowing the negative aspects of personality to sort of get on top of me. So there's 4 personality types, like I say. The first one is what is called sanguine. Now, these words, they are rather funny sounding words, but it is all taken from Greek understandings of what they attributed different personalities to, and there was different colors that were associated with them. So, for instance, the one of them is called phlegmatic, and that has to do with phlegm. So and that was one of the humors. Okay, that was talked about back in there. Not funny, not humor like funny, haha, but humor like a liquid within your body. So there was different sorts of things that were associated with colors and things like that. Now we know in this day and age, it's not about the liquids that are in your body. It's about what is in your mind and how God creates this and uses it for different purposes. So the first one is a sanguine personality. And that type of person is quite lively. They're quite optimistic. They're quite buoyant. They're quite carefree. They like to bounce around. And and some of you might be like that, So and they tend to be risk takers. They don't like being bored, and they like change. Yeah, they like change. So I'm going to spell that wrong. So they're one of these sorts of people that are very adventuresome. They get out there, they do stuff, and they're more emotionally driven. It's like if it feels good, that's good. If it doesn't feel good, I won't do it. And so it's all that sort of thing. And they like. Oops, this thing is. And they likes to talk, I should say. So and they're very talkative, So if you're sitting in a room and there's people that are just like to jibber jabber about all, so that might be a very sanguine sort of person. And then you have what is called the phlegmatic, and so that's the one that was associated with the phlegm. Okay, I know that sort of generates not a great picture, but anyway. And the color that was associated with that was green. So, So, but they tend to be people, people person. So they like hanging around with people. And relationships are very, very important, and they really like to be around folks. They're not loners. They're caring. So a lot of people that are particularly in maybe nursing sort of professions and that kind of thing, prepared to go out there, help, that kind of stuff, are phlegmatic people. And sometimes they're a bit quiet and a bit complacent. Now, that might be a more negative sort of aspect, that they're not much into change. They're not like the sanguine that's like, okay, well, let's go out there and try this. They're more kind of, no, it's okay. We'll just kind of hang around and just keep everybody happy. They tend to be sort of peacemaking sort of people and that kind of thing. Now, when we get into Timothy, I think Timothy is somewhat of a phlegmatic sort of person, So now he crosses over a little bit with the melancholy, but I think once we get into this a little bit, you'll see it. Okay, so then the third type is a choleric, and this is a goal-oriented person. They tend to be very practical, straightforward. They likes depth and not shallowness. And they're thinking-driven people. Now, people that tend to be sort of high-end managers, sort of go-getters. Now I was going to put sort of caricatures or sort of cartoon pictures up of these types of people, but the problem is with some of that is it then launches a picture in your mind about what these people are, And generally the choleric people are the people who are like, they seem to be kind of, mad and jump around and, in charge and all that kind of stuff. So you end up with kind of a negative image, whereas a choleric person can be very, very good. It's, they're leaders. They're people that are out there, and they see practical things. They say, right, let's do this. Let's get this sorted. They're good motivators, and that kind of thing. So I would say Paul was a choleric sort of person, because he was out there driven, get moving, get going, spread the gospel, boom, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So when he was thinking these things through, he wasn't so driven by emotions. Now, choleric people can end up walking over people too. They can end up stepping on a lot of people's toes. And then you have a melancholy person, and sometimes when we hear the word melancholy, we think, laid back or down. Somebody's melancholy. It's like, everything is going to pop. So they're not optimistic. You generally think they're not optimistic people. Sanguine people are very optimistic. It's great, super. And so sometimes we get this picture that melancholy is, just very kind of doer and that sort of thing. But not always. They tend to be a bit homebody type people. Don't like change. They like the town where they live. They like the family where they're at, and not on for much of a change. So just kind of keep things even keeled. They're not adventuresome, but they're good at people management. So they're good at hospitality. That sort of stuff. And they're very thorough and accurate. So they stick at it. They complete tasks, that sort of thing. And they're quite fastidious when it comes to, accuracy. And then they're devoted and compassionate people. So that's, those kinds of words are a bit different than your stock standard melancholy sort of, idea that generally we sort of throw around. So these are the four different personality types that people, in psychology, people generally agree about. And there's a lot of overlap, between these different things. The choleric person would be, quite extrovert, along with sanguine person, but the phlegmatic and the melancholy person, they're quite a bit more introvert, they're just a bit more into themselves, so happy with their own sorts of company and that sort of stuff. So, but there's a book that's written by Tim LaHaye out there, and this book's been around for donkey's years, but it's called The Spirit Controlled Temperament. And I think he wrote it back in the 70s, because I remember it from back then. But it's a very, very good book about how God uses these personalities for his glory.
Where would you put yourself on that list?
Where would I put myself?
I'd say it would be melancholic.
Yeah, I would say I would probably be a majority sort of melancholy sort of person. I'm not Mr. Excitement, so when I throw my hands around, you're all like, whoa, Woody, hang on. It's okay. You don't have to. But I wouldn't say I'm a choleric sort of person. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. So mixture of all the above. Yeah. So anyway, whichever day it is. So anyway, so hopefully, again, the reason I'm doing this is so that when we look at Timothy and look at Apollos, we'll then be able to sort of pitch them into maybe one or two of these sorts of personality types. But it does then help us then to go, actually, he's that way, he's different from me, but that's okay. God uses him in his personality, So what's happened with, in terms of personality, is when God made you, God made your personality, and that's a good thing, because whatever God makes is good. Now, what happens in the world of sin in which we live is that we then have a warped understanding of our personality, and then we go, I don't like certain aspects of that, so I will then go and bolt on certain things that will create then a character. So what then people see is your character, not your personality. So, and that's why they talk about in AA about character defects. Okay, so and it's the defectiveness of those things, especially in terms of drinking and addictive behavior and that kind of thing that lends itself down to bad roads. So so sometimes what happens is that God then comes into our life, has to unbolt some of these character defects that are in us, and then place on us the things that are good, that are then going to actually accentuate our personality as opposed to robbing from it. So I used to tell people that back when I was young, and this is when you're sort of proud and think you're a young whippersnapper and all this kind of stuff. I said, you'd have to interview about 150 different people in order to find out who the real Woody is. And that's because I tended to present in a certain way to certain types of people in certain arenas, and we all do that. Yeah, and the word that we use here in Northern Ireland is we pass ourselves. Okay, so
people who have like autism and stuff like that, like their personalities are different and
yes,
And I think when you're autistic, you're not good, not anymore. Actually, that's
yeah,
that's sure that's what they actually they are.
they yeah,
I'm
and
not even disputing that there. I'm just saying, like, what is that personality? Is there a personality thing for an autistic person? Or?
well, I think it probably could be pitched into these four areas in some way, and I think how managing those particular people or dealing with those sort of folk, obviously it takes a set of skills to be able to do that right. So and like Eddie says, they just are who they are. So and maybe what you are seeing is just pure personality. They're not worried about what people think. So
way you said earlier about there are giving you your own personality. And that was good, but I try to change my personality every day. I don't like my personality. I try to shut my mouth more, and because it says in the Bible that a tinkling cymbal, you're not to be a tinkling cymbal.
yeah, but so there what you might be perceiving about yourself is negative things about yourself which you don't like, so then you try to cover it up with oh, I'm going to stop doing that, and then what you end up doing is you end up stifling yourself. So maybe the thing to do is then say, okay, I regard myself as a tinkling cymbal, which is a negative thing. Well, how can I look at that positively? And say, okay, if I no, but
people would take that as a compliment.
but there's a thing about you that's very attractive, in terms of you're bubbly and you're in there. So you're, to me, you're a very sanguine sort of
So that's
person.
totally not,
Mhm.
totally not, no.
So
No, but we
Then
carry
you're
on with
yeah,
it.
okay, so
We could be too judgmental.
yeah.
With yourself, but you're
No.
on yourself.
Yeah, we gamble on it.
You want
Yeah.
to know what you're like on somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very true, because if you do assess yourself by your own standards, you might come to a lot of bad conclusions. So so maybe asking other people what they identify, and then speak to God and say, God, how do you look at me?
Yeah.
So and then God will reveal to you, how He's made you. So oh yeah, well, and the devil wants us to do that. The devil wants us to look at ourselves in the wrong way, and says, well, obviously God made a mistake here or something, So and God hasn't made a mistake. So so it's an interesting thing to explore. But sometimes we bolt so much stuff on ourselves that we have no idea what the personality is underneath, the real person, so,
But there multiple nature and nurture.
uh,
Like
Yeah.
some people are highly stressed and you could say, well, that's a stressful person, but they're not.
well, yeah, and that's because of nurture, not nature, so,
There's a saying, you ever hear people say, what you see is what you get.
Uh-huh.
There's people like that, what
Yeah.
you see, and they don't change.
yeah.
So don't act different around other people, what you see is what you get.
Mhm.
And that's like you just be who you are.
No, I would disagree with you, Ellie, because you see the way you said I'm bubbly, I'm not bubbly at home.
Uh-huh.
I'm not bubbly, I would be a depressive person.
Okay, so you're you're a half empty girl then,
Totally,
right?
totally. happy.
Not half full.
No,
Uh-huh.
No.
So, well, and that's interesting, because, people might perceive you, because I would perceive you more as a half full girl, not a half, not, so, and then you're presenting yourself in a certain kind of way back home. So maybe I need to go and talk to Ian about what you're like.
the
So,
people who really know me,
Yeah.
Ross really knows me,
uh-huh,
and depressive.
uh-huh,
Depressive, but it comes out, people say to me, you'd never think you had depression.
Uh-huh.
But whenever you know, you don't even have to open your mouth,
mm.
you just have to look at you to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then what we do is we overcompensate. So we go overboard the other direction.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so let's look at Timothy here. So now his name is a combination of two Greek words, time, which means honor or reverence, and theos, which means God. So if you're looking at a King James authorized Bible, okay, you'll see Timothy's name more often, Timotheus. Okay, so so it does say Timothy a handful of times, but the majority of it within the authorized Bible is Timotheus. So so it's this time, theos, so it's honoring, well, anyway, what it means is honoring God. Okay, so what a great name. That's a tremendous meaning for that name. Now the word time there is very closely related to the word for Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. Time means honoring there, but now that's what it means in the Greek, but in the Aramaic it means dirty man. So, but in the Greek it means honored and highly prized, and so it's I think I've taught on this before, but I've always wondered, why does it say Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, in that particular passage about blind Bartimaeus, and so Bartimaeus is his Aramaic name, but then it says it in the Greek, which is son of Timaeus, which is essentially on the surface the same thing. But I believe that the Bible does this quite deliberately because it's a play on words, saying, look, son of Timaeus, that's the first thing that's mentioned, which means son of a dirty man. And but then son of Timaeus, which is a Greek rendering, means one who's honored and highly prized. And so it shows really the great transition that Jesus makes in one's life, saying, look, you're once son of a dirty man, but now you're highly prized and you're honored, and you can honor God. So anyway, so that's just a very quick aside. That it's one of those preaching exercises that would take another sort of whole thing. But in Acts 16, verses 1-5, this is where we're introduced to Timothy in terms of history. Okay, so it says, then Paul came to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek. And he was well spoken of by the brethren who were at Lystra and Iconium. And Paul wanted to have him go with him, and he took with him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was Greek. And as they went through the cities, they delivered to them the decrees to keep, which were determined by the apostles and elders at Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith, and increased in number daily. Can you imagine a church like this that is increasing daily? So this is the first time we see Timothy talked about. Now we know from Second Timothy that he had a grandmother who believed, and his mother also was a believer as well. So, but it was a mixed marriage. She was a converted Jew, and his dad was Greek. So it's a bit like we have that kind of situation in this country. So we refer to it as a mixed marriage. And but because the father was Greek, they probably didn't hold to certain practices and traditions, and but because the Jews were a bit kicking up about your boy there, he's kind of Greek father, and he's not circumcised. How they know that, I don't know, but anyway, but then he had to go through that exercise. So what I want to do then is now look at Timothy throughout the scriptures. I'm not going to go to every different sort of verse, but just to highlight his characteristics. So he was a co-worker and protege of Paul. Okay, so Paul is the choleric guy that's out there and getting people, but he sees potential in this young fella. So one of the things that we did when we were in America, when I was involved with CBMC, which was Christian Businessmen's Committee, it was an outreach to businessmen, and my father was very much part of it. And he introduced me to the group, and even when I went back to the States, I used to go back to the CBMC meeting that met at 5:30 in the morning. So, but one of the things that we did with people that were saved through business outreaches, we did a thing called Operation Timothy. So, and that was basically one would be a Paul, and you got alongside of the Timothy, and you did discipleship with them. And so the book that we used was called Operation Timothy, and it was just very basic discipleship stuff. Just who you are, who Jesus is, why Jesus died, who God is, so all the basic theological sort of stuff. And he's mentioned in the openings of 2 Corinthians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Philemon. So as either there as Paul is writing this thing, or as a co-author. So Timothy was a very, very important individual. Sometimes when we hear about Timothy, we go, okay, he was a young lad, young guy. Well, yeah, he was younger, to Paul, but he was no less important. He was a very, very important individual.
Paul had him like son, didn't he?
Yes. Yep. So and that's one of the words he uses. So we'll get a list here of his position and his character in the church. So he's mentioned as a fellow worker there in Romans and First Thessalonians. So he's one of these men that is a team worker. He's as they say, there's no I in the word team. So he was very much in there, didn't draw attention to himself. It was like, this is about Christ, about his kingdom. We're working together to do this thing. So often what happens within Christendom is, and we do this, we say, oh yes, I go to John Taylor's church. And so we select out the individual, the man that's up front or something like that, or we say, oh, I go to Woody's Bible study. And that was one of the reasons why I sort of just changed it a little bit from being advertised as Woody's Bible study. It's just called the Friday Bible study, because yeah. So, and yeah, but I understand that. I get that. That's okay. But I think we do tend to do this because we tend to focus in on an individual because they're the people that sort of run that or whatever. So it's and we do it within Staris, when we talk about the various Staris meetings, we'll say, oh, Kim's meeting up in the Shankill, Ricky and Margaret's meeting over in the thing, and then, Woody's meeting in Banbridge, that kind of stuff, so, he was a fellow worker. He got alongside, of people. He was a brother there in First Corinthians, Colossians, and First Thessalonians, again referred to as a brother in the Lord. Not just a colleague. Not just this was a family exercise. It's wonderful to be able to talk to each other and refer to each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. That you really don't find that in other religions.
I heard it said like he's like an apprentice to Paul.
Yeah.
Like he's Paul speaks to him everything he knows.
Yep.
Then when Paul passes the mantle on to him.
Yeah. So yeah, because Timothy was basically the pastor in Ephesus. That's what he then became.
It's like Paul himself, where he said that he studied.
Yeah,
Same.
sure.
It narrows it down. Sometimes we do say what his Bible study, but and John Taylor's church, but I mean, you can take two ways out of that. You can be emphasizing the person,
Yeah,
or you can just be narrowing it down.
yeah. So
More precise.
yep. So
Everybody needs that.
sure. Yeah, there's not any people aren't trying to be thinking about it, but
But
Yeah.
for
It
you,
just brings it.
maybe I'm wrong here in saying this, but you don't want any glory associated with your. You
No.
don't want glory for what you're doing, you want. all-
I can't sit with you 24/7 and be your life. I have no desire to be your life. What needs to happen is Christ needs to be your life. So
Church. I am full of pride where I say I really this Bible study,
Yeah.
because I want them to know how good you are.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm putting me in it for.
Yeah.
And I know you don't want glory from it, and I know you're God's instrument, and we're truly blessed, but I guess why we let
Yeah.
your name and the
I think
conversation.
as Abby says, it's just our lingo.
Yeah.
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 As Ian says to me, Ian says, well, you going even in the woodies.
yeah, sure. Oh, I understand that. Yeah. So yeah, it's just associated language that we use, and there's no harm in it. But I'm just sometimes you need to sort of look at the obvious.
A good pastor or somebody that you do mention
Yeah.
is exactly the same as the person that will draw you closer to God.
Yeah.
Whenever you say Woody's or John Taylor's,
Mhm.
we're not trying to.
No.
No.
But we're-
Well, it's the same as Wendy, or they would say going up to Wendy's because it's Wendy's house,
Yeah.
that's where we're going, but.
Yeah.
They go Wendy speaking, someone else.
Yeah.
But some people
Yeah.
do, I'm not bad that was off here, but some people do fall into pastor worship, and then when the pastor lets them down, I'm not going back to that church.
Yes. Yeah. So because I've been in many churches and been in many of these travels, and when somebody upends or something like that, then you go, oh, that's a way. And unfortunately, a lot of those people who leave because of a personality disparity then end up being nowhere. Because they're not leaving because God's told them to leave. They leave because, oh, that doesn't suit me any longer because my head is focused on man, not God. So
Pastors maybe moved on to our church and everything.
Yep.
I could see that end of it, but I can also see the end of the other. I mean, you go to a good restaurant because you get good food,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and you may drive past 3 or 4 places that are a lot hungrier to home.
Yeah.
But the food's not good.
Yeah.
And I can see people, and I'm not saying that, if somebody leaves, that everybody gets up, but it would also have a burden on who comes into the place.
Yes.
Would you stay in a church? Somebody came in and started to change things or started to teach things, and sometimes that's what happens in a church. And people do see it the wrong way and think, well, he left that church and not, then people lodge it.
Yeah. So, that's why it's so important to have what they refer to as plurality of leadership, in the church. So it's not just the focus of one person. There is a multitude of people that are leading the place because they're all not going to go at the same time unless there's a real big something like, again, I've been in those sorts of situations too. But anyway, so the third thing here is Timothy is referred to as a bondservant. He's sold out to God. He's sold out to Christ. He is Christ's, so this is not employee here. He is Christ's slave, as it were.
Yeah.
So, and then he's referred to as a beloved and faithful son in the Lord. So sort of using your what you were talking about there early in 1 Corinthians, and how Paul would have referred to him as loved and faithful as a son. And that's a great accolade, for Paul to be able to ascribe to Timothy. It says, look, he's a loved guy. He's faithful. He's my son. So it's and he's in the Lord. So. And then he's referred to as a son there in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy in the first handful of verses, where it's getting down the road a bit, because those particular books, well, especially 2 Timothy, was the last book that Paul would have written before he was executed, and he's referring to Timothy as his son in the faith. And then he's a co-equal in the Lord's work. So in the verse that we're looking at, Paul says about Timothy here, he says, he does the work of the Lord as I do, and so Paul's not trying to say, look at me, but, he's kind of coming up and he's getting there. No, we're both doing God's work, Paul could have thrown his weight around quite a lot if he wanted to. He said, well, look, I'm an apostle. And so he was, but Paul never forced his apostleship upon people. He brought people with him, as opposed to, see you, you come on, and so, that kind of leadership is intimidatory leadership. That's not embracing leadership, because when you bring people with you and you help people to see what's going on, you'll have a lot better following than just kind of dictating to people and telling them what to do. Eventually they'll say, I saw you in the way.
Christians, should have that humility, to say I'm better than you.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've all been saved different amounts of time. We've had different kinds of experiences. I could say, come this summer, I've been saved 47 years. Yeah, well, okay, great. Praise the Lord for that. I mean, there's others here that haven't been saved, but, for a couple of years or something, but we're still in the same boat. We're still in the same family. We're doing the work of God. So, and he was an example of godly behavior, because back in Acts 16, he had this reputation about himself that he was a good guy, so and good for the right reasons. And it says in 2 Timothy 2:2 that where Paul refers to him as really as a teacher, because he says the things that you've heard and seen in me, put these into faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So the whole teaching exercise was very, very important in terms of passing the baton. And then he was a guardian of the truth, and because Paul again uses this language of guard that which has been entrusted to you. And then he's a proclaimer of the gospel, because again Paul says preach this, proclaim this. This is the important thing. And then he's seen as a man of God. In 1 Timothy 6:11, he says, and you, O man of God, flee these things, but pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and humility. So and that's a thing that I think about sometimes. I say, Lord, help me today to pursue these things. Because if you have those things in the forefront of your mind, that will keep sinful practice out of your road. So because especially in the likes of humility, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So but it's so easy for man to go and elevate themselves and say, well, look at me, look what I'm doing. This happened from the day one, so,
Yeah.
and yes, Satan himself, even before the advent of man, was like, well, this is me. I'm going to ascend above the clouds of heaven and all this.
Happened, was it Nebuchadnezzar?
Yes, well, Nebuchadnezzar, exalted himself, and then God brought him low to the point where he was eating grass like an animal, and then you had people like Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel and says, well, we're going to get our own way to God. We don't need God. So we'll get our own way there. And then God came down, confused the languages and all that. So,
Not, First Timothy 6 and verse 11, he's speaking there.
that's Paul speaking to Timothy. Yeah. So, it's interesting that the only time the phrase man of God is used in the New Testament is of Timothy. So, because he says, and you, O man of God, he's not a man of the world, he's a man of God. So, but now the phrase is used generally in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, where it says, all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God might be thoroughly equipped unto all good works. So, but it's only in association with Timothy. So it's kind of interesting. Now, the term man of God, the phrase man of God, is used a lot in the Old Testament. So now that doesn't mean that there's no men of God other than Timothy in the New Testament. It's just, but it is interesting that, if you're going to be a man of God, if you're going to be a woman of God, that's what you do. You obey what God says. You exercise righteousness, which is outward things. You exercise godliness, which is an internal thing, how you think. And you exercise faith, because without faith it's impossible to please him. For you believe, comes to God must believe, one, that he is, and that he's a rewarder of them who diligently seek him. We have to have the love of God in us. The love of God needs to constrain us and compel us. We need the patience of God, because that's not a natural thing, and we need humility. So you pursue these things, you'll be a man of God. You don't pursue those things, then the things of the flesh will overtake you. That's why the Bible says, you, a man of God, flee these things. So now let's just look about Timothy in terms of the situation and what he's talking about. So the Corinthians were a divided people when it came to respect of people, and especially workers in the faith. Remember in the beginning of the book, they were saying, I'm with Cephas, I'm with Paul, I'm with Apollos, I'm with Christ, and so there's all this kind of division and sectarianism that's going on. So, so Timothy could have been seen as, oh, here's Paul sending him. Why him? So, but so Timothy was not to be intimidated. Primarily, he does the work of the Lord, and so it's not about personality. Okay, so I yeah,
Instead of judging that they're actually doing God's work.
yeah.
The personalities for we
Yeah. Yeah. So, because, there might be things that people do that grate on us, or say, or something like that. And again, this is how the devil uses things to divide, and, I know sometimes, with speakers, they might say something in a certain kind of way, and then we pick that up, and then that's all we hear. And then we don't even hear the sermon, because we're like, he said, like 20 times. That's my problem. I tend to throw a lot of sort of andas and you know, a lot of sort of that language around. I've tried over the years to cut that down because people have been critical with me about that, you know, so, yeah. So, that's it.
Your judgments, you say something to say or whatever, and the devil used that to blind you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So, you know, I remember there was a preacher of the gospel down the country that I heard one time. And to be honest, he was really not a good orator. You know, he was not a good speaker. But you see, God was in what he was saying, because people got saved, people heard the word of God, and they were convicted and all that kind of stuff. But if you just sat there and you listened to how the presentation went, you would be like, oh, he's bad. You know, and if that's all you hear, you know, so
People find fault in everything.
oh, sure,
You know.
yeah. So
But there's the other side of that coin, or when people are speaking, it's not God's word,
Mhm.
and said to mark them out.
Yeah.
Avoid them.
yeah, yes, absolutely. Yep. So now Timothy was to be sent in peace after he came, providing that he was going to pass through back to Paul. So that, you know, the Bible does say that he should be sent in peace. So so really, you know, there's a concerted effort here. It's like, look, here's a guy that's doing the work of God, so respect him for that. You know, treat him properly. And don't be nitpicking and doing silly things, because we're in the messy church here. Messy church is full of all this nonsense, you know. And then, and as with any believer, Timothy was an asset in the kingdom and he's to be respected. So, so that's a bit about Timothy here. So we'll take a quick scoot here with Apollos, and now, Apollos is a very, very different sort of character. Timothy was, I would say, you know, looking at where he's mentioned and how and all that kind of stuff, I would say he was maybe somewhat of a backward character. You know, it was, you know, not quite sure about, you know, getting stuck into it, but he did get stuck into it. Paul was a great encourager, you know, as that choleric sort of person. You know, he's like, you know, Timothy, you can do this. It's good. It's a goal, and boom, and some, you know, so, and that is good to have those sorts of people around you, because if left to your own devices, you would probably go, I'll not go too far, you know, because Timothy would have been sort of more of that melancholic sort of individual, you know. So, so, you know, so God has these different personalities around to make the mix and match work. You know, could you imagine if you had a church full of Pauls? Or even a church full of Timothys? You know, if it was all just one or the other, you'd have a flipping mess, you know. So now Apollos is a very interesting character. So so in Acts 18, it's and this is the main paragraph about Apollos, and this is where we learn the most about him. It says, now a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things of the Lord, though he knew only the baptism of John. So he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, and when Aquila and Priscilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he desired to cross to Achaia, the brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him. And when he arrived, he greatly helped those who had believed through grace, for he vigorously refuted the Jews publicly, showing from the scriptures that Jesus is the Christ. Now that's some CV there, you know. So now he is mentioned again in Acts, and it happened in chapter 19, so it's just the next chapter, while Apollos was at Corinth. Okay, so we, you know that Paul, having passed through the upper regions, came to Ephesus, and finding some disciples, he said to them, did you receive the Holy Spirit when you believed? And they said to him, we have not as much as heard whether there is a Holy Spirit. But now that's not really about Apollos. It's just saying that, you know, Apollos was in Corinth at the time. So, and again, that first paragraph there is really more about the the character of Apollos. But let's look at who he was. So he was from Alexandria in Egypt. Okay. Now, when I was growing up, Alexandria was the town that was south of me in Arlington, Virginia. So there was the town of, or the city of Alexandria. So that's the only Alexandria I ever knew, but that's not the Alexandria they're talking about. It's not Virginia. This is the Alexandria in Egypt. And it was known for its library and for its lighthouse. Now, so it was a place of learning. There was a huge library there. Now, I believe that when Apollos was there, I would say a lot of the library had been burned down at that particular stage because Julius Caesar had gone in a few decades prior to that and just wasted the place. And so a lot of, I think from what I understand, there was 40,000 scrolls in this library that were burned, by good old Julius Caesar for whatever reason. So, but Alexandria was known in the ancient world at that time as a place of learning. So it's like a kind of a university town. And in America, every state has a university town. And so you have all these academics and students that all live in these particular cities, and so there's a lot of big libraries, a lot of research, and fancy things. So Alexandria would have been that kind of a high-end place, and also had one of the seven ancient wonders of the world there, which was the Alexandrian lighthouse. And I was reading about it and looking at some videos about that. The only one of the seven wonders of the ancient world that's still standing is the Pyramid of Giza. Okay, that's it. The rest of them are all gone. So, but the lighthouse was about 350 feet tall, and it lasted for almost 1,500 years before a couple of earthquakes kind of knocked it over. But a tremendous structure, in terms of the time that it was built, which was before the time of Christ, and then actually then finally fell apart, I think in the 1300s or something like that. But just I know. I mean, the amount of block and stone that they would have used and how they hauled that up, and it was actually withstood I think in Crete, there was some sort of an earthquake or a volcanic eruption or something at some point and created a big tsunami. And the tsunami came and hit the lighthouse, but the lighthouse withstood it. So, so there was, and it took 20 years to build this thing. So it was a major project that was built by, I think it was Ptolemy the First, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals. Okay, so because Alexandria was named after Alexander the Great. So Ptolemy the First was the one who instigated the building of it, but he actually never saw it finished. And it was his son, Ptolemy the Second, Philadelphus, or whatever his name was. So anyway, he's the one that finished it. So, but anyway, so Apollos came from this town. Okay, so this is a city that's known for lots of things. It's known for its library. It's known for its big lighthouse. So. And so that means that he was a well-educated man, because it says in that paragraph that he was mighty in the scriptures. So he was brought up as a Jewish guy, but somewhere along the line, he heard about Christ, and him being an educated boy, he decided to look into these things, and he found it. He grasped this stuff, and so now some people would say that Apollos was the author of the book of Hebrews, because Apollos was a man that really understood his Jewishness. And when you read the book of Hebrews, it's like very, very deep into the Jewishness and how Christ fulfilled this. And there was a fellow that I knew in our own assembly who was a converted Jew back in America. And anytime he spoke on the book of Hebrews, it was wild. I mean, he just had such a deep understanding of what was going on. So it says here he was mighty in the scriptures. So he was a well-spoken man. So he was eloquent. He was able to pitch things so that people got it. So I remember when I was in Portugal as a 16-year-old, and that would have been my first missionary experience a lot of years ago. And there was a missionary down there that held open air meetings, and he had crowds just focused in on him for 4 hours. 4 hours he had people there, and he just people were just like just fixed, and he was a eloquent man in the gospel, and he did a lot of visual things, and he would have taken like little twigs and sticks, and he would have carved them into like little the national symbol of Portugal is the Portuguese cock, the little rooster thing. And so he would take a stick, just a little piece of stick, and he'd take a knife and he would carve a rooster out of it, and so he would, demonstrate, God can take you as a that means nothing and make you into this wonderful thing, and so it was amazing just watching that, so I think Apollos was that kind of a man. He just could captivate people, and the things of God, and he spoke boldly. Okay, so he didn't mince words. Wasn't behind the door. So I think if there was any sort of social issues, he was straight in there, and he spoke accurately, and that it says that in that paragraph that even though he only understood things up to the baptism of John, what he was talking about was very, very good. And it was accurate. Now, Priscilla and Aquila heard him and said, "Look, let's get alongside of you." They didn't take him on in the meeting. They took him aside and says, "Look, let's just explain to you the things of the gospel just that bit more accurately, so you get this." So he was fervent in spirit, and I looked up that word fervent in the Greek, and it means to boil. With zeal, love, and anger. So now anger would be sort of a negative kind of thing. So I would say that he was probably upset about certain sorts of maybe issues of the day, and says, "See you," and thing. But at the same time, he was bubbling over with commitment, zeal, and love for the gospel, love for the Lord Jesus Christ, and love for people, because he wanted people to know the truth. Now, and he was open to correction. You see, when Priscilla and Aquila got alongside of him and explained to him the way of God more accurately, it doesn't say that, he put his hand up and says, "Talk to the hand, the face ain't listening, go away. I know what's going on." He was open to correction. And I think that's a very, very important part of Christian maturity, is to be open to correction.
Very humble when you're like that.
Yeah. So because we do get it wrong. We do get things wrong. I've gotten loads of things wrong, and so I mean that, sometimes I've listened to things I've talked about in the past, and then I've gone, yeah, that wasn't quite right. So but you go and you look and you get, back deeper into it, and you get it sorted, and that's okay. And I would say that he was comfortable in his own skin. He wasn't it wasn't intimidated by people. He was sure in what he understood and what he believed. So he didn't try to change his spots, to suit the place, So he wasn't a chameleon. And he sacrificed his time and effort, because it says again in that paragraph that he went to Ephesus. So he went to places, went to Achaia, all these different places, and that takes finance. That takes wherewithal. That takes commitment, so time, effort, money, all those sorts of things. And now sometimes people might go on trips, not because they're led by God, but because it's an adventure. And I've seen this a lot with young people going on short-term mission trips, and they say, well, this will be good crack. Now, is God telling you to go, or are you going because it's good crack? Now, it might be both, but I remember when I went to Portugal was actually the last thing on my radar, because I actually wanted to go to Israel that summer to go and do a work. Who wouldn't want to go to Israel? I still haven't gotten there, but anyway. So, but that's, I know. So, but that door closed. That didn't work that way. And because I had a lot of friends that were going on what was called teen missions, and teen missions had a center down in Marriott Island, Florida, and that's where you went for a lot of weeks to get boot camp. And then you were sent all over the world to all these different things. A lot of my friends have done these things. Like, oh yeah, I want to go and do that. That's great, super. So, and I want to go to the jungles of Borneo or something. And so I make a landing strip. Yeah, So so there's all these things you could pick from. It's nearly like a big fat catalog. And but none of that stuff materialized, and I ended up then going with one of my home church missionaries from Virginia, who had to work in Portugal. Wasn't my intention, it was God's. God got me there because God wanted to show me things, that I otherwise wouldn't have learned in, some adventure. So
a lot of people, if they're going on a mission trip, they don't take it to God and say, God, is this what you do
Yeah.
for me?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't close support.
Yeah.
Because you're going and there's no business being there, but.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
think so. Because you're there because maybe as you says, a couple of mates are going, so we'll go along with.
uh-huh.
But you're not there because you've no interest in it, like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
So,
you need to be, at least to be in your heart to do stuff like that, I think. And then ask to take it to the Lord and say, this is where you want me to be.
Mhm.
Thanks to everything, really, that
Mhm.
what you do for God. Yeah.
I was talking to Letitia this morning. We were talking just about CEF things and what have you. And but we were talking about applications to different sorts of work. And I remember applying to work down south in the mission down south. And they were very, very comprehensive. I mean, it was pages and pages and pages of stuff. It wasn't just about your testimony. It was about, references, what do you think about this, that, the other thing? And, aside from the name, address, and phone number sort of business. But one of the questions that was very, very strange was, in the event of your death, where do you want to be buried? I was like, I'm only 26. And you're asking me where I want to die, or if I do die, where you want me to, I don't get this, but these were people that left no stone unturned. It was just like, we need to know these things because it could happen.
Yeah.
No, it was this Ireland outreach,
Oh, right.
down south. So I had to give an answer. It was like, okay, if I die in Dublin, do you want to be repatriated back into the US, which costs lots of money to get a coffin on a flight, because there's no discount there, boys and girls, and which I don't understand, because you're not taking up a seat, you're just putting the hold, so you're just cargo. Or you get buried in Ireland, so and you actually had to have money available in case, of such things. Huh? I had said that I was happy enough to be buried in Ireland. So, I mean, to me, it's like, where on earth you end up, but but they ask these questions because they, if it happens,
Yeah.
they know, and then because if it happens and they don't know, then they're going and trying to figure out, and there's a dead body lying there in the morgue somewhere, and they're trying to figure it out with the family, what to do with themselves. So, but it was a very, very strange question. But anyway. And Apollos was a helpful man. Okay, because that's what he did. He went to help them. And he stuck to the scriptures in his debates, and he was very grounded. Okay, so didn't allow himself to get thrown around on different tangents of things and silly ideas. He just stuck with the Bible. So so that's a bit. I think that's yep. That's us there. Hmm? Yes, I think so. Yep. So and now in saying that, I think you do need different types of pastoral workers. So these are very, there's a lot of attributes that Apollos has that are very good for this kind of work. But I would say that he's good up front. I'm not sure if he'd be a real winner one-to-one. One-to-one, he may be talking at you as opposed to talking to you. So, one thing in Stars is we have to learn how to talk to people, not at people. So
That's the same in the church, but these are all elders,
Yeah.
The Pastor John's an elder too.
Yeah.
He's just a speaking elder.
yeah,
But you need the elders there just to take the pressure off you.
yeah,
John needs a break, or he's doing something, you can step in, or one of
Yeah.
the work elders can step in, and that's
Yeah.
not really church,
so yeah. So I mean, I'm speaking on the 4th of February there in the evening service, so you can pray for me about that. So John asked me to do that, but so
We both, whichever, go to. Which is all happy.
yes, and everybody has their strength and everybody has their weakness. So I mean, I couldn't administrate myself out of a bag. There's elders there that are a lot better at administration, but they couldn't speak.
Yeah.
So and that's okay. It's just there's the difference of ability there. So but anyway, so that's Timothy and Apollos, and so what we'll be working with next week here is where it says in verse 13, watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, let all that be done with love. So that's
is that the last chapter, is it?
this is this is coming down to the final thing. Yep. So lots to consider and talk about there. And then there's other individuals that are spoken about, Stephanus, Fortunatus, Achaicus, and different. Then it mentions Aquila and Priscilla. So we'll go through and we'll talk about these different people as individuals and just do a little bit of a character study. So anyway.
You're not qualified. Follow suit. Then you hold them.